earlier today, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition outlined details of its proposed transformation fund, a 100 billion rand initiative aimed at supporting black-owned businesses and advancing inclusive economic growth. And to help us unpack the potential impact of this fund and its broader implications for South Africa's development goals, we're joined now by Ndumiso Hadebe, Development Economist. Ndumiso, very good evening and good to have you with us on the show.
Good evening, Nosipho, and thank you so much for having me this evening.
Yeah, good to hear your voice, Ndumiso. So let's start then. So we've heard from the department when it comes to the Transformation Fund and what it seeks to what are the objectives then that it seeks to resolve there. But what do you make of the rationale behind the Transformation Fund, this pooling then of money to benefit black-owned businesses within the rural and township areas specifically?
Yes, so I think my initial sense with respect to the concept document of the draft Transformation Fund is to really bridge the gaps related to the basket of offerings that are currently available, particularly for black entrepreneurs in the South African environment. We would remember that some years back, the Department of Trade and Industry had launched the Black Industrialist Program. And of course, whilst some may have had some successes in that program, but there are specific gaps that some entrepreneurs have cited that they've not been able to fully been assisted with from such a program. And so my understanding is that this particular transformation fund is intended to close the gaps that exist from the available or the existing offerings of services that are available for entrepreneurs out there. And in particular, to really address the opportunities and to support entrepreneurs that are located in semi-rural and rural areas, given that there's a significant migration pattern that is happening into city centers, which of course at a macro level is also placing significant pressure on infrastructure within city centers and within provinces that have metropolitan areas in particular. And so my sense is that this transformation fund is also intended to also address some of those patterns that we've been seeing over the last 15, 20 years.
Certainly. And Ndumiso, when we heard in the presentation this morning from the Minister about how this fund will be dispersed, we know that it's grants, loans and equity support. There's also technical support. So not only just financial support, but technical support then to the businesses. But he also mentioned the issue of, funding startups, that in South Africa, we don't really have funds for startups. What's your take on that?
Yes, I think that has been an issue that has been long-standing for quite a sustained period of time. The gap that has existed in terms of, one, really driving an uptick in terms of the entrepreneurial culture in the South African landscape. But secondly, it's one thing to really promote an entrepreneurial culture and encouraging, in particular, young people to start up their own businesses. But if the ecosystem is not ready to be able to support new innovative ideas and also make provision for failure, then we can't expect the attitudes towards entrepreneurship to improve in the South African environment. And this is research and work that has been documented and recorded by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor for many years. And so I think that is quite an important step. I think the additional step is to really, in line with South Africa's industrial development strategy, is to say in which sectors should priority lie with respect to issues around innovation and startup culture in the South African environment. We're seeing that technology is a big driver across all industries. We also have lamented for quite some time the demographic advantage that South Africa and the African continent presently has. And so those are some of the ingredients that I think that kind of allocation should be able to aid South Africa's competitiveness locally, but also in terms of being a global player when it comes to key innovations. The key questions, I think, becomes how is such a fund meaningfully governed in order to ensure that it's able to deliver on the impact that it is intended to have.
And speaking to that note there of, this meaningful impact of the fund, Ndumiso, what are the possible risks then or inefficiencies that could arise in the disbursement and management of such a large-scale fund?
I think questions around governance and risk management becomes quite critical because the proposal as it stands is that this fund is intended to be on a voluntary basis. And so both stakeholders in the private sector and the public sector on a voluntary basis can make allocations to that fund for specific purposes. But to the extent to which governance structures and overseeing the allocation of the funds across the various asset classes, and also ensuring that the returns are able to be delivered, both the financial returns and the social returns, becomes quite crucial. And therefore, that means that the board that is put in place needs to be a credible board that also has a track record in ensuring that work of this nature is able to be delivered at a high level and at a high impact. It also needs to ensure that the transparency that is associated with the allocation of this fund is also done at a level at which the public can be satisfied that things are indeed done above board. And of course, the communication strategy regarding such a fund also needs to be meaningful. It needs to be able to reach Ndumiso in the rural areas, in as much as also needs to reach Ndumiso who's in the urban setup as well. And so those are some of the key tenets and pillars that I think will be critical in making or breaking the meaningfulness of such a fund in our current context.
Give us a call as I speak to our guest this evening, Ndumiso Hadebe, Development Economist, talking about the Draft Transformation Fund, reflecting on it and the initiative, the impact it plans to have. The number to dial 0861987000, and that's the number that Lesiba from Mabopane dialed this evening. Lesiba, very good evening and good to have you with us on the show. Give us your take. What are your thoughts this evening?
Thanks for taking my call. This is just an election ploy. It's got nothing to do with business or anything. Because as this lady says that the black ownership is decreasing, it's because they don't pay us. But before every election, there's this thing, like township economy and whatever. All these fancy things, but the only thing is they don't pay us.
Thank you. All right. Lesiba, thank you so much for your views this evening. We'll leave it there. So, Ndumiso there, Lesiba from Mabopane weighing in. He feels this is an electioneering tool, although we are past elections. But I guess the message there that the support is not really there for black business. What's your take?
Yeah, I certainly think Lesiba certainly has it all within his right to express that particular attitude. And I think it also reinforces some of the gaps that we've seen over the last while in terms of previous interventions that have been intended to supporting black entrepreneurs. And so it would make sense as to why he would also have that view, because similarly to some of the critiques that have arisen in terms of making public comments to the fund, the extent to which the fund is able to deliver real impact on the ground, we think is the real measure as to whether or not it would be a success. And so it becomes quite important, therefore, that as it's currently out for public comment, I think the DTIC had extended the deadline for submissions to the 28th of May 2025. It becomes quite important to make those inputs, particularly from black entrepreneurs who have had experience with funding institutions, who have had experience with getting non-financial support, and have also had experience in terms of what are some of the constraints that are being faced, particularly in the marketplace, to make material contributions to this particular conceptualization of the fund. My understanding as well is that it is intended to be launched at around 2029 officially. And so there's still some groundwork that is presently being done. And of course, there's a whole legislative process that will also follow after these submissions, which I think it's important for all of us to engage in order to ensure that whatever gaps and experiences that we may have had that have not necessarily addressed the needs that we've had in the past are addressed through such a fund and really optimize the platform as it currently exists.
All right. In the spirit then of public participation, let's take one more call. Milton from Hatfield. Milton, you have something to say. Have your say this evening.
Yes, yeah, wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity. Because you see, I think the most important thing, I'm very impressed with your guest there with the points that he's raising, specifically about the challenges that startup businesses face in terms of scaling up. But how I think also the fund is important, because the fund then will then be able to be that bridging facility for startup businesses, specifically those businesses in townships, then to be able to have that collateral cash injection into their businesses to allow them to scale up. Because then if you look at the available instruments within the government sector that are there then for black entrepreneurs like your black industrialists, most of them actually, they say entrepreneurs will face a lot of challenges when it comes to accessing those facilities because of the stringent requirements that are inherently there. And most of these institutions also are then unable to be flexible enough to meet the different needs of your different entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are different. Entrepreneurs from your townships face their own challenges that they have to be able then to meet, while as your entrepreneurs in urban areas they might also have those specific challenges that they face. So the fund needs then to be able to be fluid enough to then be able to address both of these needs, because if you look at the majority of the people in this country that need to be employed, most of them are in townships. So the fund then needs to have instruments then to be able then to leverage from the talent that exists in townships, because you might find that someone wants to open a business, let's say they want to distribute milk, but they need a lot of equipment when it comes then to be able to delivering that service in the township. Now,
sure. Milton, I'm going to have to cut you there. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to cut you. We're running quite late for news now, but we take your point there. Ndumiso, just as we close then, just your parting words then.
So I think, Nosipho, it's quite important I would encourage the public for us to all of us make contributions to this call for public comment with respect to the fund. And I think it's really an opportunity, particularly young entrepreneurs can make in addressing the immediate challenges that we've been facing, and to really take advantage of this opportunity. I think the Minister was also welcoming criticism and also input, structural, constructive input in this regard. I think it's quite important for us to really actively participate in this instance.
On that note, Bongane, thank you so much for your insights and engaging conversation this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Makulu.
All right, that was Ndumiso Hadebe, Development Economist there, taking us through the Draft Transformation Fund reflections.